Hi, I'm Conway Parker, and I blew the whistle on the illegal experimentation that was going on at St. Stephen's. You see, I had moved to Ethalonia about 3 months before. You see. And I moved there with my wife and 2 kids. But as soon as we got to Ethalonia, I found out, like most people there, I needed money. And I didn't know where to get it at first until I saw a job posting, and it said this company named Markoven. Markoven? Is that how they pronounce it? Markoven? I don't know. It was some Russian or German company. I don't know. But they needed a new software consultant to help with their security system. And, well, I already had a computer software degree from UNC Chapel Hill, so I was pretty happy to help, and they were actually able to give me a pretty generous deal. You see, they were going. What I would do is I would go over to St. Stephen's for 2 weeks straight, and they would give me a place to stay, and they would pay for my food, and then after I got done, I would be paid about $2,000, which that's a good deal right there. And then if I wanted to, I could come back for another 2 weeks. And I had to take that job, because if I didn't, I would just be crazy. So I go over there, and they showed me around. It was a nice building, and they showed me where I would be sleeping. And it was kind of like a college dorm, but with a bigger bed and just me. And they showed me to my office, which was down in the basement of this mental institution. And it had a big metal door. And it was kind of like a big brick closet, but with a desk, a rolly chair, and a computer. Okay, good enough. And for the first 3 days, it went well. Until I hear just the most awful screaming. And it's these guys, and they're taking this one patient out in a wheelchair, and he's strapped down to it, and he is just kicking and screaming, and I didn't know why. So I had to follow. And then they get in the elevator, but they wanted the elevator to themselves. And I just jumped up in the stairs, and I had to follow that elevator. I had to find out where it was going. So I get up, and I go on the first floor, not there. And then I quickly run up those stairs, and then I see those guys, 2 guys with the man in the wheelchair, get out on the 2nd floor. And then they go into Dr. Eugenic's office. And a big, tall security guard closes the door behind him. I knew there was no chance of me getting in there. So I started to show him my nerdy southern charm. And I said, hi, I'm doing some research here, and I help with the security systems. And the security guard, he said in his Irish accent, so? And then I said, so I would just like to know, what's going on in there? Because there are no cameras in that lab. And our security guard says, yeah, if there were cameras, you wouldn't want to see, mate. And I said, oh, why would I not want to see? And he said, 'cause you won't believe the shit that's going on in there. And I said, like what kind of shit? And he said, bad shit, mate. You don't want to go in there. You wouldn't believe what you saw. And then I just thought, okay, I have got to know what's going on in there. And then I hear the loudest scream coming from that lab. And I don't even want to describe how bad it was. And he said, oh yeah, I hear that all the time. All that screaming. Really makes you wonder, huh? If humanity is actually worth saving. Like what those scientists in there are supposedly trying to do. And I just thought, oh, man. And I asked him, how does the government not know about this? And then the guard said, well, mate, the government actually gave us a couple $1 million, and all the rest of this was provided by Markovic. And then I was starting to put two and two together. And I asked, why would the government allow this to happen? That's because Dr. Eugenic, he approached the president and said, blah, 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 science, 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 money. And, well, the president, he's a little bit timid and easily swayed, so he gave it to him. And also, the big corporation controlling all this contributes about 10 or 20 million of this. And also, we charge people to do horrible experiments on them. So, yeah. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I mean, why did I not see it before? I guess I just didn't really want to see it. I didn't want to believe it. So I said, thank you. And I started walking back to my office. I got in the elevator. And then, out of nowhere, a hand popped in the elevator doors and just separated them. And then a man in a black suit appeared and got in the elevator right next to me. And I knew who it was. It was Richard Toney. You see, I got a bad feeling about that guy, Richard Toney. He just seemed like just a bad guy in a suit, you know? And he didn't really talk about his patients. Well, they weren't even his patients. He was the businessman, not the doctor. But he just talked about them like they weren't human. And I just never liked that about him. And he wasn't the nicest guy. Let's put it that way. And he asked me how I was feeling about all this. So I lied and I said, yeah, I'm feeling fine. And he said, oh, really now? What about that nice conversation you had with one of our guards? He's not supposed to be telling people that. And you might have just gotten somebody killed. And my eyes went wide with fear. And he said, oh, yeah. Should you tell anyone about this, your life will end abruptly. And we landed on the basement, and he said, all right, you're stopped. Now get back to work now. wouldn't want you to get behind. And I thought, was I really just threatened by my own boss? Like, is he threatening to skin me alive? But I've never been the bravest man, but I knew someone has to tell about this. And so I just continued my work, and then I started going on YouTube to see, is there anyone who could expose this? Because I have seen videos in America of people just going over to these corrupt corporations and exposing them. So maybe they could do that, and I could leave an anonymous tip for them. And then I saw the YouTuber Ethan Upshur, and I thought, ooh, my savior has come. And so I left him an anonymous email. And I thought it was anonymous, so I thought I was safe. So I finished my work for the day. I shower off, and I must say, rather nice showers in the dorms, and I go to sleep. But that night, I had the worst nightmare. I dreamt that I was awoken in the night by some big, thunderous boom, and then a big, large man knocked down my door, and he looked right at me. And he was coming right towards me. And I tried to run, but he grabbed me, threw me on the bed. And then I woke up. And then it was early morning. I knew I wasn't going back to sleep after that. So I get me some coffee, shower off again, and then I get dressed and get ready to go. And as soon as I come back to my office, I noticed something. I noticed that the metal door is open. That's weird because I could have sworn that I closed it. And then, to my horror, I see Richard Tony there with the CEO of this whole operation, Joel Blair. And then that same tall, big Irish guard knocks me down and says, "All right, you nosy little prick, spread 'em." And so I spread my hands while I was on the ground, and he searched me and took my phone and my wallet. And then Richard Tony came out to say, "Well, I'm very disappointed in you, Mr. Parker. I had faith that you would keep this between us, but I suppose no such luck. You want to give him the rundown, Mr. Blair?" And he says, "With pleasure. Mr. Parker, you were under arrest for jeopardizing our joyous mission here, which is why you will be sent to the prison." And then that big Irish guard knocks me over the head with his nightstick and grabs me and pulls me down the hall, and I realized I was just like that man being pulled. And they drag me, and then they shove me in this little room full of what looked like brown skins, and then I realized they were brown prison uniforms, or beige prison uniforms, and then that Irish guard, he starts taking off all my clothes, and then he says, "All right, put this on, or I'll put it on for you, and you won't like how." And then I did. I put on the clothes. And then he took me by the collar and dragged me down out of the room and then down those big stairs and then put me in one of the white padded cells with the bars over it. Man, I fucked up. I didn't know if I was ever gonna see my wife again. But I just hope that email got somewhere. Well, it wasn't long after that. It was about an hour or two that they let us prisoners out in the middle of this mini prison they had us in. And they let us outside the bars. You see, they turned a key and pushed a green button, and that unlocked the electric locks on our cells, on our cell doors. And then they let us out into this middle square area outside our prison doors and let us have some exercise. Yeah, because I'm sure I can train for the Olympics with only a freaking metal picnic table. Yeah, exercise. What a joke. And then one of the guys takes a look at me, and he had thick black hair and a black beard. And he wasn't wearing his suit. He was just wearing a pair of orange underwear. And he looked right at me and started walking towards me. And I was thinking, oh my God, I do not want to be made a bitch in this prison. And he grabbed me and said, oh, you smell so good. And I nervously laughed and said, oh, thank you. I use Dove. And he said, oh, you, my friend, are good enough to eat. And I immediately pulled away from him. And it's worth mentioning, he had this big butterfly hawk tattoo on his chest. And then he starts slowly walking after me when I tried to get away from him. And he starts saying, feed me, feed me. And then, so I run back to my cell and I close the door, but the electric locks, they're not on. And so he gets out of there, so he pulled my prison door open, and then he came in that dark cell and was like, ooh, I'm gonna have me some good food tonight. And I screamed, help, help, somebody. But I guess he didn't really care about us. And then I start running, and I try to run up those stairs, but the fence door to the outside of this basement prison was locked. And then, I don't know why this, but I ran to the other prisoners for help. And I just screamed, help, this guy's trying to eat me. And he says, yeah, that I am. And one of the guys in a deep, calm voice says, yeah, that's Frankie the Cannibal right there. And he said it like it was normal. He just said this like he was just normal. And I couldn't believe that. And then, as soon as the cannibal walked towards me, the serious guy, he gave him a good, strong backhand. And I was forever indebted to him for that. And then the serious guy says, what's up? I'm Sergio. And I said, oh, I'm Conway Conway Parker. Nice to meet you, Conway. Yeah, there's some crazy people down here. You see, we all thought we were going here to get treatment. Or we were just dumped off here because no one really cares about a few forgotten lunatics. It's sad. But don't let it get to you, bud. I've never felt so good about being called bud in my life. And then the little came back on, and I guess that meant I had to get back to my cell, which I did. And I was so thankful that they locked it. I had never been more grateful to be locked in a cell in my life. And I laid down a little bit. And then lunchtime came. They sent us. They gave me some. They gave me a tray with a little slice of sandwich bread, some boiled rice, and some boiled chicken, with a little bit of pepper on it for flavor. Yeah, thanks. Even though back in the dorms, we had us a full-on buffet. But not here, I guess. I've been a bad boy. And I asked the guard, hey, when are you guys planning on letting me out? After my 2-week contract ends? And he says, oh no, boy, we'll keep you in as long as we feel like it. I didn't want to be part of that. I knew I gotta get out of here. But how? I didn't know. So I ate my lunch, if you could even call it that, in peace. And I laid back in my cell and hoped it would all be over soon, 'cause that's all I could do. And then I heard a and then it was time for our last recess of the day. I had hope that nothing weird would happen this time, but I was wrong. I see another big, tall, white man with short but still thick black hair and blue eyes come walking towards me. And he said, darling, you look so beautiful. And I said, oh, thank you. And he kind of stroked my cheek and said, you have such amazing bone structure. And I said, oh, thank you. And he said, darling, will you be mine? And I thought, oh, shit, I'm about to be made somebody's bitch in this prison. Oh, God. And then I thought, maybe this guy could protect me from all the crazies. And I said, you know what? Yeah, I'll be your girl. And he leapt with joy and picked me up and hugged me. And it was an uncomfortable hug. And he said, yes, this woman wants to marry me, men. And they all cheered and cheered. Even some of the guards cheered. We are getting married. And I said, what, married? I didn't sign up to get married. And I explained to him, hi, sir, what's your name? And he said, my name's Don. And I said, okay, Don, well, you see, I'm already married in the outside world. And he said, there is no outside world anymore. This is your world now. Once they put you in this room, you can never leave this room. And I thought, no way. I have to get out of here. I have to get out of here. And then, as we were talking, a pale, old, bald guy came walking up towards me and said, Dawn, do you mind if I talk to your new wife here for a minute? And he said, oh, of course. And then the bald man, he took me away and introduced himself as Billy. And he said, okay, listen here. That man is crazy. He was committed here for rape. And I thought, oh God, why did I say yes to this guy? And he said, okay, you've got to get away from this guy. But if he does anything to you, I'll protect you. And I say to him, how are you going to protect me? And he said, oh, my ways. And I just thought, okay. And so I think of the best thing to do. And I said, hey, I thought about the other guy that was in the wheelchair being brought up to the lab. And I said, hey, did they experiment on you too? And he said, why, yes, of course. They say if you help us with experiments, they'll let us go. And I said, oh, okay. So I make my way up to the top of the stairs that was in our prison yard, and I go up to the fence, and I bang on it for attention, and the same big Irish guard comes up and says, what? And I said, hey, I could volunteer for an experiment if you let me go, and don't worry, I won't tell anyone about it. And he said, oh, really? Really? You'll do an experiment? Yeah, I sure will. And he's like, okay, well, I'll tell the doctor you're interested. Although, I must warn you, Mr. Conway, this experiment is going to be worse than anything those freaks have down there for you. And I said, oh, I doubt that. And he said, all right, suit yourself. I'm off to go tell the doctor. And so I walk back down there, and then I hear the and I knew it was time to go get back in my cell, and thank God it was. And so I lay back down on the metal cot they had for me with a thin bag of stuffing as a mattress and a thin blanket and pillow, and I tried to snuggle up best I could, and I was thinking about my poor wife back at home. Anna, I'm so sorry. I'm coming home, Anna, I promise. I'm going to do whatever I can to get paroled out of this terrible place. And so I try to sleep, but I just couldn't. And then I hear boom, 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 and then I see the white wall right next to me start to vibrate a little bit, and then I saw cracks, and I thought, what is going on? And then a big hole of dust appeared in my cell, and my wall had a massive hole in it the size of a man, and then out steps, I see the slicked back, thick black hair with the blue eyes, and I thought, oh God, it's the guy trying to make me his wife. And he said, darling, I'm here for you. Your sweet Edward is here for you. Wait, no, your sweet Don Edward. Your sweet Don Edward is here for you, and I've made you a bridal gown. And he pulled up what appeared to be a dress, but it was made out of old, bloody, brown, beige prison uniforms. And I thought, oh God, I'm not the first person he's done this to. And he says, hold still, I'm going to put it on you, my dear. And then he covers my mouth and then takes my prison jumpsuit off me and then makes me wear this gown, this sick gown. And I felt who knows how many other men had worn this thing. And he said, oh, darling, we're going to have the most beautiful ceremony. And I screamed, Billy! And then out of nowhere, a thick black cloud came in. And he said, what are you doing? What are you doing here? And then the cloud grabbed him and threw him against the bars. And then Don Edwards, he started punching the bars with super strength. I guess the experiments do sometimes give you super strength. I didn't know. And then he punches through the bars, but it was too late. The swarm had grabbed him again, and then I hear gunshots and security guards coming down. And then I saw the swarm throw Don down to the ground and pick him up and throw him down again. And then I hear a few gunshots, and in a puddle of blood, there laid Don Edwards. And then the security guards came over to me and said, Are you okay? We don't want to have to clean up another body in here. And I said, well, honestly, I'm pretty traumatized. And one of the security guards said, yeah, join the club. And then they unlocked my cell door and really take a look at me since I had that bloody gown on. And then they said, all right, well, since you're new here, it might be best to move you somewhere else. So they take me by the hand and they lead me up those stairs and through the metal wires. And then they start leading me. And then they take me to the security desk in the basement. And then I heard a conversation between the guards that I'm so overjoyed that I got to overhear. You see, they were at a security guard desk, and another security guard was at the desk on his computer. And one of the security guards that was holding me said, that big Irish guard again, said, yeah, we're taking this guy somewhere else. Anywhere else we could take him? And the security guard said, yeah. You can take him upstairs near the lab and wait for him to be experimented on in the morning. And then, thank God, the Irish guard asked, Alright, so what's going on up there? Your page is going off like crazy. And then the security guard says, to my sweet relief, yeah, we got some reporter here snooping around. I don't know. And then the security guard looks at me and says, alright, I tell you what. How about you take him back to the cell, make sure he's locked up good and tight, and then tomorrow take him up to the lab. And he said, alright. And he was like, alright, you lucky day, you're going back in the cell, but in the morning we'll get you and then perform a few experiments on you. And if you're really, really sorry, since it looks like that reporter that you sent an email to is here, we get him to go away, and if you be a good boy, we might let you go. Alright? Yeah, good boy. And so he takes me back down to my cell, and I know just what I have to do. As soon as he puts me back in that cell and starts walking away, and he walks up all the way up those stairs and through the security fence, I start screaming, hey everyone! There's someone here investigating all this! We're gonna be free! And then the whole prison erupts in pandemonium. The about 8 remaining prisoners start hooping and hollering like monkeys. And they start going absolutely crazy, screaming, yes, yes, we're going home, we're going home. And then I say to Billy, Billy, why don't you help this guy? And then he does. And I'm so thankful he did. He took out his big black swarm and he sent it flying through the prison. And then, evidently, he went up to the first floor. And then, sweet relief, he goes up into through the wiring that surrounded the prison, and then he picked up that big Irish prick, and then he slammed him right through the fence, the mesh fence. And then that poor Irish bastard was shredded. And then the black swarm got into the machine and then disarmed all the locks in the prison, meaning we were free to run. And so I ran. I was the first one up those stairs, and I ran. I threw open the prison gate, and we all ran through that long, dark hallway with the big black Billy swarm as our guard. And then we all ran up those stairs, and we started going. But there was lots of gunfire I could hear. And so then I hung back, and I had the other guys deal with the guys with guns. And I listened to where I heard the gunfire, and I ran the opposite way. And then I found a big locker in one of the filing rooms. And I thought, this is my lucky day. And then I opened the locker and noticed that there were papers and papers in there. And so I took them all out. And then I quickly took out one of the supports that held all the papers. And then it was big enough for me to hide in. So I did. I hid in that locker and closed the door. And I dared not to make a sound. And I was in there for hours until I was certain that it was all over. And then, after hours, I stepped out, and then I noticed that I walked back into the grand lobby and noticed that there's no one guarding the door, and I make a beeline for it. until I hear, "Hold it right there." And then there stood Richard, Tony, and Joel Blair. And they said, "Oh, you didn't think we'd let you get away with this, did you, Parker?" "Oh, you thought wrong, boy." And then they pulled out their guns, and I screamed, "Billy!" And then, as if it was like the whole prison erupted, or asylum, whatever you wanted to call it. And then there was once again the big black swarm, and they tried to shoot at it, but no, they were both lifted by the big black swarm. And then I looked up as they exploded in a rain of blood and bodily fluid. And then their entrails fell to the ground. And then some big storm erupted right over the asylum, and I had to run out and see what it was. And I saw Billy up there, and I also saw National Guard trucks storming towards the asylum. And I waved them down, and I showed them that I had no weapons. I said, please, I'm a victim. And one of the guard guys got out of the armored vehicle, and I ran with my arms up and said, please, you gotta help me. And he said, "All right, get behind us." And then they started shooting at that big black mass that Billy was in. And then I saw him go down. And tears went in my eyes, because that man had saved me. But at the same time, I knew he had to go, because no man should have that much power. And then the National Guard guy, whose name later I found out was Travis Coffey, said, "You okay, son?" And I nodded, yes. And then he sat me down on one of the trucks, and then he introduced me to you, Ethan Upshur.